This episode of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is made possible thanks to support from listeners like you. So if you enjoyed the show and want it to continue, please support us on Patreon over at patreon.com/geeks or via PayPal over at geeksguideshow.com/crowdfunding. And I want to give a special thank you to Paul W., who just signed up this week to support us on Patreon, and to Jason Enberg, who just increased his pledge amount. So big thanks again to everyone who's contributed. We really appreciate it. All right, so now let's get to our show.
Wired.com presents The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. And here is your host, David Barr Kirtley.
Hello, and welcome to episode 529 of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. I'm David Barr Kirtley, author of the book Save Me Please and Other Stories, which is available now on Amazon.com. We had a great conversation about the book back in episode 500, so definitely check that out if you missed it. And our guest today is Melinda Snodgrass, making her 5th appearance on the show. She's the author of dozens of novels and screenplays, and her Star Trek The Next Generation script, The Measure of a Man, has been voted one of the 10 best Star Trek scripts of all time. Together with George R.R. Martin, she edits the Wildcard series of shared world superhero anthologies. And she's also serving as executive producer on the upcoming Wildcards TV show. And in this interview, we'll be discussing her novel Lucifer's War, a newly revised edition of her 2008 novel The Edge of Reason. And now here's our interview with Melinda Snodgrass. All right, so we're here with Melinda Snodgrass. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for inviting me. This is going to be fun. I really enjoyed the times we've talked before.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, and so we'll be talking about your novel, Lucifer's War. So how'd this book come about?
Well, it started out life on New Year's Eve, 1999. Or whatever it was. When we were going to go into the new millennium. And although we aren't really in the new millennium, as all good science fiction writers know, but still, people were celebrating. And I was out with friends, Walter John Williams and Laura Mixon and Steve Gould, and we were having, queso and chips and margaritas and watching the celebrations go around the world. And I said to myself, how is it we're on the dawn of the 21st century and we're getting dumber and more credulous than we should be. I mean, we have all these scientific discoveries, and yet people still believe in healing crystal power and guardian angels and tarot cards and all this nonsense. And then in the back of my head, I thought, well, maybe there's a reason. So I started writing this book, and it started out life. I actually sold it to Tor Books under the title Edge of Reason. And, I wrote 3 books. I'm actually working on the 4th and final book in the series right now in that series. And, but publishing, New York publishing is a problem. So things happened that killed the sales. And so the thing got canceled. And, later I went back, and my wonderful agent, who sadly I lost 2 years ago, Kay McCauley, went and got back the rights to all of my books so that they belong to me again. And so I completely rewrote the first book and found a boutique publisher. And now the books are coming back out again under a new title. And the reason I did the rewrite is I had written a TV pilot based on the books. And what I did for the script was so much better than what I'd done in the book that I rewrote the book. I have found that it really focuses the mind when you have to take something from prose into the film world. What is important? How do you open it? How do you start? And it just ended up working a whole lot better. So the book got rewritten, and I'm very pleased with it. And so that's sort of the story. And the weird thing is that if I thought people were credulous in 1999, it's unbelievable now, the kind of nonsense that people are accepting that's being pushed on them by social media, and that they're swallowing whole cloth. And so I really wanted to try to, make a stand for science and rationality as opposed to magic and superstition and religion, which, I think is silly, So.
Yeah. Well, so going back to New Year's Eve, so you have this idea that you want to write about the sort of the battle between science and superstition, and then kind of how did you start thinking about a plot to express that idea?
Well, I wanted it to be present day. I didn't want it to be in a fantastical universe. I wanted it to be our world, a very recognizable world, and I wanted a young man who finds himself swept into this, eons long war that's been going on between these alien creatures from alternate dimensions or multiverses that come. They're drawn to human beings because of our spark of humanity, our creativity, and so that was where I wanted to start, was to see how he would adapt to that. And I wanted him to be a man who had been raised in a very strict religious background. And so that this was a real head spinner for him to be told, every god and every dark myth you can think of is actually a lie and is in fact creatures that are trying to destroy humanity because they're feeding on you. They're feeding on your worst instincts. And I know that's not a particularly new thing because I've seen that before, but that idea that we are all unique in how we celebrate joy, and we are all pretty much the same in how we hate and fear and hurt. And so, trying to feed the good wolf as opposed to the bad wolf, I guess, or, go to the light rather than the dark is, what we should be striving to do.
Right. And so the setup of the book is that you have these Lovecraftian monsters from another dimension who feed off human fear. And it turns out that they've started all the religions, all the world religions throughout history have all been started by these monsters in order to make us more fearful and emotional
and hate and to hate each other. I mean that they're different. They're different because their skin color is different. They're different because they worship a different god. And therefore, I not only fear them, I hate them, and that those kind of negative emotions are delicious to these creatures. And so they have done their best to further those kind of sectarian wars and genocidal wars based on things that are meaningless. I mean, I had really hoped when they finished the Human Genome Project, and it was so clear that we are all identical. I mean, there's nothing, skin tone is so superficial, and that I had hoped that humans would go, well, how about that? Look, we're all, but it didn't work out. It didn't happen. And we're seeing it every day. And, in the anti-Semitism and the racism and it's stunning that we can't comprehend that on the most basic and cellular level, we're all the same. We're just sort of striving to realize our best potentials.
Yeah. Well, so talk about the main character, Richard. Kind of how did he come to you?
Well, interestingly enough, I play in role-playing games. I love role-playing games. I'm still playing in role-playing games. And I had created Richard for a role-playing game. And I fell in love with the character. I wanted to use him in a book. I just thought he was a really interesting sort of tortured soul. And I also have this fascination with a relationship between fathers and sons. I hadn't realized it until an interviewer, a Canadian gentleman, had been interviewing me at a convention, and he said, "You realize every story you write is about fathers and sons." And I was like, "No, it's not." And then I stopped and went, "Oh, yeah, you're right." And I think some of that is I had this very deep, very intense relationship with my father. He was both encouraging to me, but he was also enormously demanding. And at times he would slip, and I had a half brother who was many, many years older than myself, but occasionally my dad would slip and refer to his other son, John, Uh, so I was sort of raised to be his son and meet his expectations, which unfortunately my half brother never did succeed in doing. And so I think partly what fascinated me with Richard was this idea of trying to live up to the ideals that his father wanted, and always feeling like the dummy in the family, the kid who is the disappointment, because he has two older sisters who are, one's a terrific lawyer and the other's a neurosurgeon, and he chose to go into this blue collar profession that they're all looking down on. So, and I wanted to explore also a character who's hiding the fact of hiding his sexuality, especially from his father, because they're a deeply religious family.
Yeah, I mean, he's a very unusual. I mean, he's a police officer. He becomes, in the course of the story, a police detective, and so it's a little bit of a detective story, the book. But he's a very unconventional protagonist for a detective story. He was almost making me think of, he's almost like the opposite of Sam Spade or Philip Marlowe or something. He was kind of making me think of how Michael Moorcock created his Elric character by just doing the complete opposite of Conan the Barbarian. And I was wondering if you saw Richard in any way as sort of the opposite of the typical detective hero.
Oh yeah, I wanted the extremely sensitive, very well educated, East Coast Brahmin who everybody's looking at him and going, "Dude, why are you here? You don't fit in at all." Because I really wanted to play that. He's not comfortable. He doesn't seem to feel like he fits in anywhere. And the course of the books, as I've written the series, is him coming to terms with not needing his father's approval and taking command and being in charge, and not second guessing himself all the time. I just think absolutely competent people and are boring. They're dull. You want a character that's going to grow and change, and so that's been sort of the fun of it.
Yeah, and he's short. He's very anxious. He doesn't drink. He's like very very much the opposite of the hard drinking, super macho. Sam.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I also had that. He acknowledged that once that drinking, he always ended up someplace that was not a good place. And so he just stopped, not because he was alcoholic, but because it was. He knew it was a substitute for, he would drink, end up in somebody's bed in a sort of search for companionship and for connection. And it was always a fake. So he's, trying to push all that aside and and he has a deep belief in a system of justice. I mean, it's also very difficult. I mean, when I went back to the book, after the issues that we've had of the police brutality issues and what's, defund the police and all of these issues, you have to really stop and look at a police officer character and think, how am I going to address these issues and talk about, all the bad apples, and are there good apples, or does one bad apple make all of them bad? And so I wanted to spend some time with that. I mean, I have a friend who is a homicide detective who was, in fact, a very good officer, but, there are a lot of less good policemen out there. So.
Yeah. Well, I want to talk, I don't know if we mentioned that this is set in Albuquerque, which, do you want to talk about why did you want to set it in Albuquerque? I love New Mexico, and I wanted to have, in some ways, my state be a bit of a character in these books. It's also a very weird place where you have, Los Alamos Laboratories, Sandia Laboratories, high tech, high energy, scientific centers. You have the Santa Fe Institute, which brings together some of the finest scientific minds in the world, come here to lecture and study and, commune with each other. And then on the other side, you've got people who will balance your aura
and sell you a crystal to deal with your cancer. And there is this mythology in New Mexico, this sort of, the veil seems thin here. I mean, I had an acquaintance in a young Hispanic woman who once mentioned that her grandfather used to go into the mountains to wrestle with demons, and you were like
literally.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, that was, yes, Grandpa's gone into the mountains to wrestle with demons. And so, that sort of system. And, we have the penitentes here. And of course, we have the Native American cultures as well. So there is this sort of really interesting mix of the high tech and highly scientific. I mean, the atom bomb was created here, in Los Alamos. And then you have this other part of the world, or other view of the world. And New Mexico is sort of unique for that. And so I think that's one of the reasons I really wanted to set it here and, not in Chicago or Los Angeles or, someplace that didn't have this sort of strange mixture of cultures.
Yeah, I was trying to think if I've ever read another novel, fantasy, science fiction, or otherwise, that's set in Albuquerque, or even New Mexico primarily. And I'm nothing's really coming, off the top of my head. Nothing's really coming to mind. It does seem to be sort of a underutilized geography.
I'll brag. I'm blanking on the title, but Walter John Williams wrote a wonderful novel set in New Mexico about a small town sheriff, like in southern New Mexico, and a weird experiment gone wrong. God dang it! I'll think of it. I'll Google while we're talking. So that's the only one. The only other one I can really think of. Although I'll take it back. George Martin, one of his scenes in the Armageddon Rag is set on the West Mesa of Albuquerque, out on the West Mesa for the big rock and roll concert that, calls demons or something. That was at the end of that book. So there's three of us, but we're all New Mexico writers. So, maybe that's what was the attraction.
Well, yeah, I have read Armageddon Rag. And I mean, I think there's certainly books that have scenes set in New Mexico. I mean, like Roger Zelazny's Trumps of Doom has a scene set in Santa Fe, which is one of the reasons I always wanted to go there. But in terms of
right.
this whole book, it takes place in Albuquerque. Well, like 90% of it takes place in Albuquerque. So you really get to know Albuquerque. That was part of actually one of the reasons I wanted to read it. It was just to get to know a little bit more about Albuquerque, having just driven through a year or two ago. And came to visit, and we had such a good time. It was really fun to show you this amazing state, Yeah, I guess I'll just explain for listeners that when I interviewed you in 2019, I mentioned that I always wanted to go to Santa Fe because Roger Zelazny lived there, and you said, "Oh, well, if you're ever here, let me know. We'll grab something to eat." And so my girlfriend and I, we drove out to. We made a road trip from Austin to California and back, and so we stopped by and visited you, both passing through town, both directions, and then a couple months later, and then we liked it so much. A couple months later, we came back and I proposed to her.
And of course, we have to mention your traveling companion because Oryx was. I got to babysit Oryx, and that was your beautiful, beautiful Manx cat. So that was fantastic.
Yeah. I actually don't talk about Oryx on the podcast that much, but yeah, we have this adorable cat who travels with us in a backpack and walks around on a leash and stuff, and has been back and forth across the country multiple times. So yeah. Thank you so much for watching Oryx so that we could go to the Meow Wolf. That was very nice.
Go to Meow Wolf. Yeah. I need to set something at Meow Wolf at some point. Definitely. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, maybe in book 5 or something you can have.
Well, I think I'm going to wrap this up in book 4. I'm a screenwriter. Things have to have an ending. Hopefully, a satisfying ending where I stick the landing. That's really important to me. That I think if you blow the ending, it's never as satisfying for readers. So.
For sure. I guess I should explain for listeners too. So Meow Wolf is, if you don't know, it's this art space in Santa Fe that George R. R. Martin helped to finance, and it's really, really cool. If you're ever in Santa Fe, definitely everyone go check it out.
Yeah, do check it out. It's pretty fantastic. So,
But so like I was saying, I feel like I did get to know a lot about Albuquerque reading this book. And have you lived in New Mexico pretty much your whole life, or I mean, it seems like you know it pretty well.
Yes, my parents moved here when I was 5 months old. So I can't quite claim I'm a native because the natives take that very seriously. But I'm close. I'm real close. And no matter where I've gone, when I went to school in Austria to study opera, I always came home. And even when I've been in LA working because of my screen work, I've always kept my home in New Mexico, and I always try to come home. And this is my base. My roots go deep here. I think there's something about this place that my dad used to warn people: if you come here, don't stay any longer than 6 months, because if you do, you'll never be able to leave. Because he had intended to set up a branch of his business for my half brother to manage, and then we were supposed to move to Honolulu. And at the end of 6 months, my dad said, I can't leave this place. I love it.
Yeah, no,
and so we stayed.
I was, I mean, obviously, I chose Santa Fe to propose to my girlfriend. I just couldn't believe how beautiful it was. I mean, I sort of had a romanticized vision of it because of the Roger Zelazny connection and everything, but it just blew me away how beautiful it was out there up in the mountains with all the flowers and the adobe buildings and everything.
Yeah, and just the art. And it's the closest thing to a European city you're going to, it has that feel when you come to Santa Fe. In fact, I'm working on developing a television series set in Santa Fe right now. So we've been writing some scripts. We're putting together a package to take out for sale. We'd hoped to get it out before Hollywood shut down for the holidays, but that didn't quite exactly work out. These things happen, but still it's been really fun to, set a show here and really build a show around it and make New Mexico and Santa Fe a real character in it.
Yeah, well, maybe we can definitely talk more about your Hollywood stuff later. But let me ask you first. I mean, there's a bunch of locations around Albuquerque that the characters visit in the book. And so I looked up, like, these are all real, right? Adobe and Stars, Artichoke Cafe, Frontier Restaurant, Caro's, and the McDonald's on Isleta.
Isleta Boulevard, yep.
And then...
yeah.
Oh, no, go ahead.
No, yes, I used, unfortunately, Adobe and Stars, which was a wonderful bed and breakfast in Taos, New Mexico, has unfortunately COVID killed them, and they're gone, which is a shame because it was a lovely, lovely place. But yes, I picked places where I had been and things that I knew. I wanted it to feel very grounded and very real.
Uh-huh. And then, like, I think these are closed too. I was just sort of Googling just before we got on the call here, but like Andrews, Pueblo Pottery, Bella Vista, and Gray's seem to be closed. But I'm trying to, like, if I ever go back to Albuquerque, like, what should I check out?
Yeah, well, yes, unfortunately, they some of them are gone. I mean, Bella Vista was this wonderful sprawling restaurant in the mountains and back of the Sandia Mountains, and you could get all the fried chicken or spaghetti you wanted to eat, and it was just a hoot. I mean, there were these sort of wonderful places, but in a way, as New Mexico has been discovered, we've lost some of that funkiness that now Santa Fe is hanging on to it. Santa Fe is like, you're not gonna replace our funky. Albuquerque has gone a bit more. It's starting to feel a little bit more like a small sized LA to me. It doesn't have quite the sort of overgrown cowtown charm that it did when I was a kid. So it's a little bit different now.
Well, I wanted to ask you too. So one of the characters is Rihanna, who's a student at University of New Mexico. And I believe you were yourself a student at UNM, right?
Yes, I was.
So did you draw on any of that experience?
Oh, yeah. I mean, the Frontier Restaurant with its famous cinnamon rolls plays a part in it. The library. I mean, before we had, Google and we had the internet, it was doing research for anything you were writing. I was at the university, up in the stacks searching for books. And so, I wanted to play with all of those places. And I wanted to create someone who was a duality, who had been bred to somehow merge magic and science in a way that they hadn't succeeded at prior to. And so she, I hope she's a tragic figure. I hope she's a figure that people will, sympathize with, because she's young and confused, and she makes some terrible mistakes in her search for identity, which I think so many of us when we're that age, 17 years old, and you don't exactly know who you are. So I wanted to play with that factor too. And in fact, I have to bring her back in book 4 or some form of it. Because again, if you create a thread, I think you need to pay it off. And there's a big thread with her, especially in book 2. So, and Richard does something he'd promised he wouldn't do. And he does. And then it's going to have consequences. So that's my plan anyway. So.
Yeah. That's really cool. And how about some of these other characters? You want to just say briefly? Angela is the coroner. Weber is a fellow police officer. There's Kentness, this mysterious billionaire. Do you want to just say sort of how those characters develop?
Well, I needed an Obi-Wan Kenobi figure. But like with Obi-Wan, Obi-Wan Kenobi has to die. So Kentness is basically, he is Prometheus. He is Lucifer. He's Coyote. He's been all of these figures through our history. He is also an alien who is native to our universe, to our, 4-dimensional universe. And he has been struggling to hold back these other creatures from the other multiverses for, hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions of years. And he's a very lonely figure. He's kind of the last of his kind. And so with him, it was, I needed him there to draw Richard into the world. And then I needed him to get off stage because, you can't have the mentor figure who could just fix things. You have to have the young struggling hero or heroine have to figure it out on their own. And he works with a figure that I had a lot of fun with, which is my, dumpster Jesus. Basically, he's a splinter of Jesus, but the one that actual Christians, true Christians have created and calved off from all these other facets of what is a Jesus figure. This is the one that actually follows the, do unto others and, be kind. And he hooks up with Prometheus to try to, help defeat his own kind. And he's been fun to write because he's the one who can be really irreverent and, cuss a lot and say all the things that you want people to say. And he's been fun to play with. I hope he's a little bit of a comedic character, but, also I hope shines a light on things. And then interestingly enough, the older police detective, Weber, I realized that as I wrote the books, that that was where the love affair was. And so I realized when I wanted to rewrite the book, I had to give Weber, he didn't have a viewpoint when I first did the books, but then I realized he was going to become Richard's love interest and eventually his husband. And I thought he better have a viewpoint. So I put him in as a viewpoint character now in this book. And, to let him start to, grow and develop so it doesn't seem to come so much out of nowhere. I'm very grateful for the opportunity to go back and sort of smooth everything out. In some ways I'm sitting here going, maybe we ought to write like all of the books of the series before we publish any of them, because, even though I plot very carefully, like I did with my space opera, my Imperials, sometimes I knew where book 5 was going to end, and I know where book 4 of this series ends, but there are certain things that you don't expect. And then, you're like, oops, can I go back and fix that now? Oh, shoot,
Well, yeah, let's talk a little bit more about the rewriting the different versions. So you said it was originally published, I think in 2008 as The Edge of Reason. And that's because Richard, he gets this sort of anti-magic sword, the sword that destroys magic. And so that's kind of like the edge of reason, right? Am I interpreting
right.
the title
Yes,
correctly?
That's correct. Yeah.
And then
That is correct.
Then this new version is called Lucifer's War. So why did you want to? Did you have to change the title, or did you want to change the title, or how did that?
I wanted to change the title. I mean, for one thing, there's been a lot of Edge of Reason books out there, and also it felt like this was more to point about what it was I was doing. I think it was perhaps more on the nose, but on the other hand, I wanted this book to find its audience, because I don't think it ever really succeeded before in finding its audience, and it seems to be now, which is nice to see. And also I suck at titles. I'll just put that out there right up front. I think they're very, very difficult, and so I'm always struggling to find something that's more it's going to say more and help people find a book that might be to their taste. So that was, I did want to retitle them, and book 2 is coming out as The Devil's Understudy, rather than The Edge of, I can't even remember what they called it, but anyway, so we're just retitling so that this thing can hopefully land with people who are interested in these kind of issues and topics.
Was Edge of Dawn, was that one of them? I haven't read that.
That's book 3. Okay. Yeah, that's book 3. When Richard gets basically a kid that he's going to raise. And I really did like that book. And, that one we're going to have to figure out what the retitle is going to be. It's interesting because the rewriting on the subsequent 2 books became less intense as I went on. I mean, I did something in the second book that I hadn't really realized until I went back and looked at it. I had fridged a woman, and I went, I don't want to do that. So I wanted to change that because, we do learn and we learn from the culture around us and how to navigate that culture.
I guess maybe could you explain for a listener? Yeah. I mean, so fridging refers to sort of a female character being killed as sort of a plot device to advance the male hero's story. And
to motivate the male hero. And I realized that I hadn't done it quite as an extreme a form as one normally does, but it was still a fridging. And I looked at it and went, no, we're not doing that. That's changing. And I was very glad I got to, make that change, because societies do, I mean, we may be going backwards in some ways, but in some ways we are, I hope, starting to step forward a little more and, acknowledge people, whether they be, women or trans or gay or, whomever. We have to, we just have to be a little bit more thoughtful than we might have been 20 odd years ago.
Mm-hmm. I guess one issue with the Edge of Reason title is that it doesn't tell you what genre the book is. It could be science fiction, it could be, literary fiction, it could be urban fantasy, and so like Lucifer's War, you're like, okay, this is fantasy, that it makes, that title makes it very clear.
Yeah, and I think I think there was this thought that maybe Tor was going to try to push it as, not genre, even though it clearly is a genre book. And I think that it just fell between, the stools, as it were. It didn't seem to fit in anywhere. And so, and also there were big delays between books 1 and book 2. And that just killed. I mean, I'd written a book, but publishing vagaries, when somebody can't find the next book in a reasonable amount of time, and that first book goes out of print, I mean, your series is doomed. You're dead in the water, because nobody's going to pick up the second book of a series if they can't get the first book. And that's the hell of traditional publishing right now, which is what I think is, starting to drive writers away from New York publishing and to a different paradigm.
Yeah, and I definitely want to talk more about that. Let me just ask you though about the cover copy. This is for The Edge of Reason. It says provocative as the Golden Compass or the Illuminatus trilogy. The Edge of Reason dramatizes the fundamental conflict behind the hot button issues of today. Did you think of this as a provocative book, like when you were first dreaming it up, or did you what do you think about that description of like provocative as the Golden Compass or so on?
I did. I mean, I thought it was really going to, hit Christian fundamentalists hard, or even Muslim fundamentalists pretty hard, because I do think it's provocative, but it's, for better or worse, I don't seem to get a lot of trolls. I kind of wish somebody had, invade against the book and burned it and all this other stuff. I might have had much better sales if I could have gotten, one of the big tent, preachers to, lose their mind over it. But unfortunately, it never happened. So, but yes, I do think it's provocative. I mean, I am a secularist. I'm not religious. I mean, God knows I've been through, every permutation of that. My father was Roman Catholic. My mother came out of a tradition of very fundamentalist Christianity, where every word in the Bible is literal truth and that kind of nonsense. And then I played around with Eastern reincarnation, and then I ultimately went, none of this makes any sense, at least not to me. And I find the wonders that are being presented to us by the James Webb Telescope and, the probes that we're sending out to the moons of Jupiter to be much more awe-inspiring and fantastic than any kind of, religious presentation. At least for me, I think the wonders of the universe are enough wonder for me, as it were.
Mm-hmm. I mean, so this book originally came out in 2008, and in the mid 2000s, there was this bit like atheism was really big in the culture. There were all these best-selling atheist books and all these atheist organizations and stuff. I joined a bunch of them. Were you kind of involved with that at all, or paying attention to that at all, or were you just kind of doing your own thing?
I was certainly aware of it. I mean, I had read a number of the books, God is Not Great, and some of the others. I never, I'm not much of a joiner. I've never been, that's why I think church didn't stick for me all that well. But yeah, I mean, I was certainly very aware of it, and I'm aware of the discussions. And the main thing to avoid is again, I have a basic rule is people can believe any damn thing they want, but I have two things. They can't make laws based on whatever their particular sky daddy has to say, and don't proselytize. Leave people alone. It's your beliefs are your beliefs. I respect them. You can hold them, but you don't start genocidal wars because of your sky daddy, and you should not make laws based on it. So that's sort of my basic rule of thumb.
Yeah. No genocidal wars. Always a good.
Always good. Yeah.
Good policy.
Good policy. And sometimes in many ways, what we're seeing in Ukraine is an extension of, a sort of strange white Christian nationalism coming out of Russia. I mean, they don't believe right. They're not, they're less than. They allow for gay people and, my God. So those are the kind of things that I think we're seeing the bonfires being lit from all of this.
Well, because there's a reference to Putin in the book. I assume that's something you added in the revision? Or?
Yes, I added that in the revision. Yeah. I mean, because, he's the Russian Orthodox Church has become an enabler of frankly what isn't a genocidal war right now, and it's so weird. I mean, I don't understand this obsession with LGBTQ people. I mean, this idea that somehow a culture is less than, when this has been with us through all millennium. I mean, there have always been people who are different, in terms of how they love and who they want. And now it's become this measure of it's been presented as corruption in a way that I find just horrifying. So
yeah, absolutely. Okay, so you mentioned that this is sort of you're getting away from the New York publishing world with this book. So this is from Prince of Cats Literary Productions. So you want to explain what that is for listeners?
Yeah, it's sort of there's these popping up, these what I call boutique publishers. They don't operate quite in the same way as a big New York publisher. I mean, obviously they pick and choose books they're going to represent, but they don't. It's more of a partnership, and my publisher, he handles having books copy edited. I picked my artists. I have a wonderful artist, Elizabeth Leggett, who I want to brag on because she's amazing. And she's actually the artist guest of honor at World Fantasy next year. And she lives in Albuquerque, interestingly enough. But I paid her to do the artwork, but it was a discussion between my publisher, Alexi Vandenberg, Elizabeth, myself, what kind of covers we wanted, how we wanted to do that. But they handle layout. They're responsible for getting it up on all the platforms. Alexi handles a lot of the marketing, like figuring out, when he wants to run an ad and when he wants to put things on sale. And the beauty of it is, okay, I'm going to get a little legal nerd here on everybody. What happened to writers that just killed us, frankly? I believe it was 1977. There was a Supreme Court decision called the Thor Power Tools. And the Thor Power Tools case ruled that a company had to list inventory as income. And up until this point, New York Publishing had these big warehouses in New Jersey where they would stockpile books. My friend Fred Saberhagen made a very good living, put 5 kids through school, 3 of them to medical school, based on his residuals, the payments that he got from books that he had written years ago, but they were still in print. And a bookstore could say, hey, I need 3 more of the, Fred Saberhagen's Berserker novels, and then they'd get them out of the warehouse and ship them. Well, the Thor Power Tools decision said that these publishers could no longer afford to do that because all those books that were sitting in warehouses were suddenly counted as income. So what happened is the backlist vanished. And the backlist was bread and butter for authors. It was how you wrote a lot of books and they kept making money and, so on and so on. That world vanished. And so suddenly everybody was competing for that 6 weeks that you had on the shelves. And after 6 weeks, you got stripped and the books went back to the publisher and got mulched in the same way magazines are, which is also a terrible thing. But with ebooks, with Amazon and iBooks and these other things, all this inventory, if you will, is just floating in the cloud. And so your books are always going to be there. And that means that your backlist survives. People can, if people start reading my Imperial Saga or they start reading this Carolingian series, they can always find book 1 because it's going to be there. We're not going to run into that book is out of print and you can't find it anywhere except possibly at a used bookstore someplace. And so I think it's upended the way we've traditionally done publishing. And I'm here for it. I think that it gives writers an opportunity to have their legacy remain and stay alive. And even after I'm gone, my heirs and assigns, my estate will still be, there'll still be some money coming in from people buying those books on these various platforms. It's a kind of weird form of immortality, I guess. And it's a very different setup. And so far I've been very, very pleased with it. And again, I don't know that I'm fortunate. I've had a career and I'm known because of Star Trek. So I'm not an unknown writer. I'm not certain, hopefully you find a boutique publisher if you're a new young writer who helps you find your audience. Because otherwise you're just throwing your book out there and hoping for the best. And that can be problematic.
Yeah,
So
well,
does that make sense?
oh, for sure. Yeah, no, I told it. I mean, and especially like it's been so frustrating. It's so frustrating following an author and they bring out 3 books out of a 5-book series or something, and then the publisher's like, oh, these aren't selling well enough. We're killing the series, and you're kind of like, well, the author wants to continue the series. A lot of times they've even written the books,
Mm-hmm.
So it's nice with this more self-publishing, boutique publishing kind of world that at least you can, if the author wants to, they can finish the series and they don't need a publisher's permission to get the last couple books out.
Well, I'm a classic example. My Imperials, my big space opera, I sold as a 5-book series. I had all 5 books plotted. I had written 3 of them. I was working on the 4th book. And Titan, my publisher at the time, said, these books aren't selling well, and it's all our fault because we mismarketed them. I'm like, oh, good. And so we're killing your series. And at which point Kay said, well, fine, then, give Melinda back her rights. And now I was able, the 5th and final book is coming out probably I think in just a few weeks. The final book of this series is out. So I got to tell the story that I plotted all those years ago. I had worked all of it out. I knew how the whole story went. I really wanted to finish it. And I love series. I mean, to get to read a series and see its conclusion is such a joy for a reader.
Yeah, and I've only read the first book in that series, but I was really intrigued. You said the premise is that each book jumps ahead 10 years or something, and so you follow the main characters, growing from teenagers to being in their mid-50s or something. So I'd love to read the rest
final
of that
book.
series.
Yeah, well, 4 of them are out, and the 5th and final book will be out in November. So it's done, and we watch these 2 characters go from 18 to mid-50s. I do make a fairly big jump between books 2 and 3, but then they get shorter, the jumps. But I just wanted to follow. I wanted to follow these characters. I wanted to see how they developed, and there's a big sort of unrequited love story at the heart of it that eventually I requite. Eventually, so
when the publisher said they mismarketed them, like what do you think? What did they do wrong, or what should they have done instead?
Oh, they said they had the wrong covers on them, which I would agree with. They said they downplayed the element of these 2 people in this love story. They downplayed that instead of trying. They tried to make it look like a big space, nothing but space battles, and that wasn't what I was trying to do. I was writing about societies in crisis and otherness and second-class citizenship. And there are some space battles, but I was also more interested in cultural issues and how they affect societies and how we are likely to behave when we finally meet aliens, which, forgive me, but I think we're going to go out and kick the crap out of them. And that was sort of the premise of that series. Was I thought, what if we're the evil invading aliens, rather than the other way around? And that was how the genesis of that book series was. I'm a screenwriter, so we like to flip things on its head, flip it on its head, as we say.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's another big complaint authors often have with big publishers is that they do the covers and then they don't, the author doesn't like the cover or the characters don't look at all like they should or whatever. So I get that. That's another thing that's nice, I guess, if you sort of recruited the cover artist yourself, is you don't have that. The horror of a cover that you don't like at all.
Yeah, that you're looking at and going, what was that? And I think it's better now, but there was a period where, most of the characters in the Imperial Saga are not white people. They're not. That we've intermarried so much that we're, as David Brin says, we're now the Great Golden Race, and there was a period there where publishers were very reluctant to put people of color on covers. Thank God that's changing. But, this meant that my characters could be presented as they actually are, by Elizabeth, and beautifully, by the way. She just did a fabulous job. So, and she's doing all my cover art. I'm like, Elizabeth, you're mine. Please do all my books,
Yeah. I'll also just throw in, I mean, my favorite author when I was a kid, before I discovered Roger Zelazny, was Robert Asprin. And I saw that Prince of Cats they just put out a new edition of Another Fine Myth, the first book in Robert Asprin's Myth series.
Yes, they have the rights to publish the entire series. So they're going to be bringing out all of the myth books again, which is, that's fantastic. This writer that, maybe has been a bit lost and forgotten, there's going to be a whole new generation of readers who are going to be able to enjoy those books.
Yeah. So if you have kids, especially, because I discovered those books when I was about 7 or something, and just if you have kids, I can't imagine anyone not loving those books.
Yeah.
But let's get back to, you said you started talking about your Hollywood projects you have going on. So kind of what's the latest with that?
Well, I'm developing a show that is not science fiction at all, which is actually not that unusual for me. I mean, I'm known as a big science fiction writer because of Star Trek, but I also did a lot of work on legal shows and cop shows and different kinds of things. But no, I'm developing a show set here in Santa Fe, which is sort of in my own head. It's sort of northern exposure in the Southwest. What life is like here. So I've got that in development. There's and we're writing scripts for it. And I have another project that is sort of post-apocalyptic, and we need to develop that a bit more. I just have a lot of irons in the fire, and hopefully one of them is going to actually, really take off here. I love writing scripts. They're just, I enjoy writing books. Basically, I like to write, but I love writing scripts. To be able to do so much with less is just very challenging and very fun to me. But yeah, that's what I'm up to. Actually, the show I'm developing is called Potluck, and it's about a group of people trying to get into the pot business, but mostly it's about the people and about Santa Fe. And so, and I've recruited some very talented writers and working with a partner on it, and a gentleman who had this initial idea, and then we all convinced him that really, instead of setting it in Oregon, he needed to bring it to New Mexico, and he agreed. So here we are.
I guess I was curious, in the book, in Lucifer's War, there's a passing reference to this coven, this witch's coven, and they've put it about that they're actually a meth lab to not attract attention. And Richard says, yeah, that says something about Albuquerque, that, it's just a meth lab. That's not not going to attract attention.
No, unfortunately, that's true. That Albuquerque did have had a history of, a lot of meth labs in trailers in various parts of the city. And so, I was just trying to be fair to, there's a reason Breaking Bad was set in Albuquerque. This is a very poor state. I love it. It's magnificently wonderful, but it's not, we're one of the poorer states in the United States. And so sometimes people have to make choices that may not be the best, but they're doing the best they can.
Yeah, there's just a couple of references in the book to like New Mexico's famously bad roads. At one point, Richard is commenting that like 1 out of every 3 cars or something has a busted taillight. There's the thing where he says that this is the state where people celebrate Easter by shooting off guns. So just like
absolutely true.
Colorful stuff.
Yeah, no, it's Easter Sunday. It's pow, 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 pow. Jesus is risen. Yay, pow, pow, pow. You'll hear gunfire. It's a funny place. It's a unique place, and I hope I've talked about some of the less lovely things, but some kindness. I tried, but that's our state. So.
Mm-hmm. In the bio in Lucifer's War, it says she is currently an executive producer on Wild Cards for Universal Pictures and Peacock. Is anything going on with that?
Yes, that is something that's going on. We are in development. Hopefully Peacock is going to want to let us, maybe at least shoot a pilot or hopefully put together a writer's room. We're having a meeting about it in a few weeks, a couple of weeks, another meeting. So, we'll see what develops. Development just takes a while. I mean, things are better with the streamers. Things happen faster, but it's still a laborious process to get a show on the air, which is one of the reasons we wrote 5 scripts for Potluck. Is we wanted to be able to say, look, here's a show, we're ready to hit the ground running. And we can start gearing up and prepping and shooting right away. You don't have to, wait for us to, all we've done is a pilot. Now you've got to wait for us to catch up. Now we're ready to go. So that's one thing that's changing in the industry. But, Peacock and Universal don't tend to work that way. So we're dealing with a pilot and hoping they like it enough to greenlight it. So we'll see.
Yeah. Yeah, that would be great. And I hope that Potluck show happens too. I mean, it would be great to see a show set in Santa Fe.
Yeah, and this other project I'm working on would also shoot in New Mexico. We have a fantastic film industry here. We have, great sound stages, one of the largest green screen facilities in the United States, owned by Netflix, actually. We have great crews. My goal is to bring the producing and writing level people to New Mexico instead of having them in Los Angeles. I've been mentoring writers through the Stagecoach Foundation, which is one of George's projects. And we have a lot of talent here, a lot of young talent here. We don't need to set up a writer's room in Los Angeles. We can do it here in New Mexico, and that's my ambition and goal. So.
Yeah. So do you want to say anything about George's projects? Because his train is up and running, right? Have you been on his train?
Yes. We celebrated George's birthday. He had his birthday party on the train. It was great. It was a great evening. We all rode the train. We'd hoped to see the sunset, but it was raining. So instead we got beautiful clouds. The train is fabulous. The restoration is beautiful. The bar car in the Dragon train is completely restored to how it was in 1942. So it's just, it's like stepping back in time. They have, bartenders and snacks and so forth. They're planning a Halloween train. I don't know where they are on that. And then there's the Christmas train, and there's the Valentine train. George wants to do a mystery train where there's a murder on the train, and then you have to solve it. It's great. So it's a lot of fun. If people are coming out to visit New Mexico, they might want to add the train ride out to Lamy and back, or the sunset train, which just goes out and you look at the sunset and come back. So that's happening. And in fact, the other show I'm trying to develop will utilize the train. And I have another script that has a lot of trains in it. And believe me, trains are one of the hardest things, because trying to work with Amtrak, because they actually have a schedule and so on and so on. So studios just love the fact that George and his partner, Bill Banowski, own a train, a private train, because you can shoot without having to work around all these other issues. So it's pretty cool. I think we're going to be doing a lot of filming using the train.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll just explain for listeners. So George bought this old train line that was sort of out of use, and kind of, I think, with a couple of partners, and sort of brought it back, and it just runs, to Lamy, which is just, I don't know, not too far outside Santa Fe. So it's just kind of the experience of riding the train back and forth on these old tracks and having dinner, theater, and stuff like that.
The train was designed to carry freight. What happened is the actual train station, the Amtrak train station, is in Lamy, not in Santa Fe, because the city fathers of Santa Fe jacked up the prices of land in the 1860s. And the Santa Fe, Topeka, and whichever said, we're not paying that. So they came out to Lamy instead, which is 17 miles outside of Santa Fe. So if you take the train, you will be picked up in a small van and driven to Santa Fe from Lamy. But the train that George and Bill bought was a freight train. It would carry the chili crop and coal and other things, but mostly the chili crop from Santa Fe out to the main train station in Lamy. So it runs 17 miles, and it's a private track and a private train. So they get to, play and do whatever they want. I mean, only George would end up with a toy train, a toy real train to play with. So.
Yeah. I'm just thinking, one of my favorite movies is Throw Mama from the Train. And the main character in that, he's a writer. And he says at one point that every great romance and mystery has a train in it. So I think
there you go. Yeah, there's room.
Something
room.
Cool about trains. Yeah.
Yeah.
I also just wanted to mention, for if there's any listeners who are Roger Zelazny fans, that when I was in town, you sort of took me around to some of Roger Zelazny's favorite places to eat in Santa Fe. So I thought maybe I would share that with listeners in case anyone else wants to check those out. So you want to just say what were some of Roger Zelazny's favorite places?
Well, we went to the Shed, where Roger always got 3 desserts. So you had a chance to go there. The Pink Adobe, which was one of his other favorite restaurants. I think you went up to the ski area, right? You drove up to and saw that. Gosh, what else did we? I'm blanking. What else did we do?
Well, I mean, those were the Pink Adobe and Shed were those were the main ones I wanted to touch on, because Pink Adobe has this gorgeous outdoor courtyard where you can eat. And then I thought it was funny because you said he would go to the Shed, and he was a very tall, skinny guy, and you said they would just be, and he would order all this dessert, and they would just be amazed at how much dessert he would eat.
Yeah, well, there used to be another place we went to called the Palace, which was a restaurant. It's open up now. It has a different name, but it was an Italian place, but it was in the original whorehouse in Santa Fe, this old building. And they had a dessert cart that was literally 4 levels high, that they would roll over to the table. And Roger would sit there and go, "Yes, I'll take the creme brulee." And they go, "Very good, sir." And they start to move the cart, and you go, and the chocolate cake. And they go, "Very good, sir." And they start going, and the cheesecake. And, he never got fewer than 3 desserts, and oftentimes would go to 4. And it was so, George would moan because Roger was this, tiny, tiny, thin man. I mean, tall and very thin, but he loved dessert. So when we held our wake, our celebration for Roger, when we sadly lost him way too young, we all brought desserts to remember him by, and that was how we chose to commemorate Roger and what he meant to all of us. Yeah,
no, that's so cool. I guess I'll just mention, I interviewed Laura Mixon a couple months ago, and I know her and Steve Gould pretty well because I did the Viable Paradise Writers Workshop about 20 years ago, and so I spent a week or 2 with them. And so she just said, I asked, "How did you meet Steve Gould?" "I don't know." And she says, he was staying at Melinda Snodgrass's house, and that's how we met, basically. And I was like, "Oh, wow, I never knew that."
Yeah, we're very incestuous recruitment writers here. We all know each other. We all, partied together and, played role-playing games together and, went camping and just, we did a lot of fun things. And then we all got older, and then COVID hit, and it makes it a lot harder now. But yeah, Steve and Laura are they're dear and they're wonderful. They've been such an important part of our lives and our world here. So.
Yeah, and they live in Albuquerque, right? They live in
Albuquerque, yeah.
Yeah.
And and then George and I are up here in Santa Fe, and we're sort of scattered about, but there's a lot of science fiction writers in New Mexico.
Yeah, if people don't know, George refers to it's like the New Mexico Mafia is this very prolific community of science fiction writers in that area.
Yeah, sadly, we've lost 2 of our greats. We lost Roger and we lost Fred Saberhagen. But Susie McKee Charnas is here, Steve Sterling. Stephen Donaldson is here. Walter John Williams. It's a very prolific group of writers here.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. No, I can't wait to go back. I had such a good time there. So looking forward to
anytime. Anytime. You guys are always welcome. So it'd be fun to see you guys again.
Yeah.
But you have to bring Oryx. I mean, don't forget Oryx.
Yeah. No, definitely. Like we're a little busy with wedding planning right now, but as soon as we get some free time, definitely I want to head back up there.
That would be great. We'd love to see you.
Yeah. Okay, so cool. So we're pretty much out of time. Do you have are there any other projects or news or anything that we haven't gotten to?
No, I think we pretty much covered it all, but thank you so much for this opportunity.
Yeah, well, it was great talking to you. And so again, we've been speaking with Melinda Snodgrass about her novel, Lucifer's War. So Melinda, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
And that was our interview. So big thanks again to Melinda Snodgrass for joining us on the show. This episode of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy was made possible thanks to support from listeners like you. So if you enjoy the show and want it to continue, please support us on Patreon over at patreon.com/geeks or via PayPal over at geeksguideshow.com/crowdfunding. Alright, so that was our show. So thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you next time.
The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is a production of Wired.com. For more information about the show, visit geeksguideshow.com. To learn more about your host, visit davidbarrkirtley.com. Music and voiceover produced by yours truly, Jack Kincaid. If you enjoyed this program, tell your friends. If you didn't enjoy it, tell no one. Thank you for listening.